Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back from lunch. What's up on the slides? Yeah, okay. It's working. So my name's Andrew Davies. I'm from ABHI, and I think they've really cranked the temperature down, haven't they? You probably had a nice lunch. They don't want you falling asleep, so it's really quite cool in here. I'm from the Association of British HealthTech Industries. If you don't know who we are, it's shortened to ABHI, which is a lot more manageable. We're a trade association, a non-profit membership organisation representing health technology companies, so medical devices, diagnostics and digital health companies. We have about 400 members. About 80% of those are SMEs, the other 20% are large multinationals. So asked to come in and talk today about health tech and how it can support chronic conditions. Really enjoyed this morning's session and heard a lot of quite detailed work about a lot of things that are going on in particular hospitals using particular technologies. I'm going to give a bit more of an overview of the different sort of use cases that health tech can support with, from fairly high tech to fairly low tech, but the importance of all of them in tackling this huge issue. And we've already heard, to some extent this morning about what a big issue it is. And I must admit, I did get quite depressed myself as I saw my age creeping closer to that line where my health is going to plummet, apparently. But already, half of us are living with a long-standing health problem. And 20% of people are reporting that as being severe. The four most common problems, as you can see there, are allergies, high blood pressure, low back disorder, and depression. So it is absolutely a mix of physical and mental health conditions. And again, really pleased this morning I've seen a lot of case studies around the mental health side of things. So we know we've got a big problem in managing these conditions. What we also know, and I think it was Francis this morning, no, not Francis, someone else anyway this morning was also using data from the Health Foundation here. Not only is it a big condition now, but it's a huge condition going forward as well. So some really big growth rates coming up there, particularly, look at the latter ones, diabetes, chronic pain, really significant growth. Why does that matter? Well, obviously it matters to individuals, to what they're living with. It matters to the health system and how they're going to cope with that. And it matters to us as a country and an economy, because how do we afford all this? A couple of stats up here. The top one is quite recent, but it's from the US. The bottom one is not so recent, but it's from the UK. I couldn't find one that was recent from the UK. Don't know whether we stopped reporting it or not. But what we can see is significant parts of the health budget is going on managing these long-term conditions. So with that growth, with the amount of money it's already taken up, with the fact that we know there's not going to be significant money in the short term going into the health system, and I'll come on to some of the politics of this later, what are we going to do about it? So chronic conditions, they really need to be monitored closely. Ideally continuously, real-time data, this sort of thing. But you need close monitoring of these things. And you can't do that with people because, A, people cost a lot of money, tech can cost as well, but we haven't got the people. So tech can really help scale up the management of disease and how we prevent that disease from either occurring in the first place or from exacerbations. And particularly, it can help us shift the care out of hospital into community, help with self-care. I think there's a few wrinkles in this, but however, because only a few tools are working across multiple conditions, and we know generally these are conditions that are multimorbidity conditions. The reasons why it's only working, not working across multiple conditions, again, it's quite complex. In some cases, it's a technology designed for one particular application. In some cases, it's the bureaucracy of setting up the services. And in other cases, things like the governance, things like the workforce to be able to support across different conditions. And this means that there's lots of kind of point solutions being deployed into the system, which again makes it harder to scale, makes it harder to put in the first place. So I think that's something we really need to address. And again, I'll go into a bit of this later on. So what is the role of HealthTech in this? So first of all, prevention. How can we identify the at-risk populations, intervene early, intervene before it's a significant problem, intervene when it's less costly to intervene and easier to manage the condition, possibly cure the condition, depending on what it is. That's one particular area. Second, wearables and wellness. We are seeing, I put these in nice little silos, haven't I? 1, 2, 3, 4. Probably one of the things I always do myself, say, we can't think in silos, but anyway, it looks nice on a presentation, hopefully. All these, there's grey areas between them. So then we've got wearables and wellness, a really growing market in wellness and a use of wearables for that, in terms of health, fitness, care. And again, that's one of those grey areas of where does one become the other. And we've actually got treatment and management of diagnosed diseases. And lastly, there's certainly companies around here doing this, how can we use the technology to better communicate with patients, with populations, between clinicians, and between teams and patient-centered teams. So there are sort of 4 big areas that certainly I'm seeing use of technology. So just an example of that first one, really sort of looking at population as a whole, or within a region, and really looking at how can you deploy your workforces. This is something I'm going to keep coming back to. We have to prioritize. We have to look at how we make best use of our workforce, how we make best use of our money. So if we can identify who's at risk, weight that with the impact of that risk, we can then start prioritizing where we put our preventative strategies. And we can also use this to really address the health inequalities of deprived populations. And it also helps us, if we keep repeating this cycle, we can monitor the impacts of interventions as well through the same methodology. So I think using the data analytics, and I'm going to try not to delve down the rat hole of AI in this, all too easy to throw a couple of hours away talking about AI and the possibilities, but using the possibilities that we have with data analytics, whether that's AI or not, we have a great opportunity to really shift things. I think it was in the FT yesterday, wasn't it? Wes Streeting now sort of giving themselves sort of 3 strategic shifts, and one of them was from treatment to prevention. And this sort of approach can really support that. One of the others was from analog to digital, and those 2 things really go together. So wearables, whole selection here. Sorry, I know you can't wear a scales, weighing scales, but I couldn't figure out where else to put it. It seems to kind of fit here. It's in that same sort of ballpark. It's a tool you can go out and buy yourself, use yourself, inform yourself, help change yourself, support your training, your fitness, whatever it might be. And increasingly, we're a lot of interest in how can this also help the health system? How can we use that data? How can we incorporate this with other data we have? Now, one of the things is you don't know how reliable this data is. Okay, all these I think I've picked up, well-known brand names. Let's assume they're pretty good. But you can go on Amazon and pick up a tracker for 20 quid or whatever. How do you know it's any good? There is no, there's limited regulation in this space. Some of these, the Apple smartwatch I got on here, they have functions within them that are regulated. Some of the heart monitoring features, but you don't. But that's not the case across the board. So how can you be sure of that data when you use it? What context was that used in, and how reliable? So I've used some of these myself in the past. Some of them I've used in tandem, just to see. And, the heart rate from my wrist monitor is completely different to the heart rate from my chest monitor, by a significant amount as well. So we have to be careful, but it can show useful trends and it can show what happened when you were doing something. It's useful data to add into the mix, but it's only part of the story. But one of the things we can do is it does help build the story, so really important area to look at. And the more we can build these functions, build these tools into a regulatory framework, so we can be sure that they are reliable, that they're useful, the better. So of course, these are all physical monitors. There's also the mental health aspect of things as well. And it doesn't matter. I can't remember the number. Hundreds of thousands of different health and fitness apps out there on Google Play and on the Apple Store. Again, most of them not regulated. Some of them are regulated. The checks on whether they are regulated, should be regulated, are fairly scant. So again, have to take these with a pinch of salt, should I say. But there are lots of tools out there. But equally, some are regulated. Some are making medical claims, have gone through CE or CA mark, whichever it might be. So again, lots of tools at our disposal. And I think, again, we saw some very interesting, well, we'd split up by that point, but there was some very interesting data around mental health and the impact of that and where it's peaking, etc. And really, tools like this really are supporting access to mental health services, which again, the waiting times for ADHD diagnosis, these sorts of things are enormous. So if we can scale access to it through technologies like this, really making a difference. So looking more at treatment and management, that side of things. I'll probably skip through quite quickly that first slide where I introduced myself. So it was Andrew Davies. What was my title on there? Don't know. Anyway, I lead on digital health at ABHI. So I've been talking a lot about digital. But I do want to point out it's not just about digital. So on this slide, I've got things like continence bags, stoma bags, wound care. They're technologies that serve millions of people every year. Yeah, I've got remote monitoring on here. That's, virtual wards are doing, 100,000 people a year. We can't afford to forget also about these other technologies that we think, well, they're just there. They're just, that's old-fashioned stuff. I'm going digital. But they're really important and critical to the people who are using them. I've got interest as well. I used to work in this area also, so waving a flag for it. But there's patients out there who rely on these technologies day in, day out. But even these technologies are now becoming more digital, building sensors into wound dressings, building sensors into stoma bags, etc. So very soon, that will be part of the data flows that will be helping to inform both the person themselves about the trends that they're experiencing and the clinician. So we have those sorts of technologies. We've got a picture of FreeCell Libre here, which is probably one of the biggest changes, really in sort of looking at the diabetic management in recent times. Of course, now we're going to closed-loop systems, etc. They're keeping on evolving. But really, significant changes and huge amounts of data and enabling people to track their own health, etc. Then moving more into the kind of hospital at home area, dialysis at home, and remote management of at home. And in remote management, we're looking at a range of different indications. And I think this is one of those areas where, as I said, we kind of have things sort of siloed. So we've got the virtual ward for respiratory and got the virtual ward for heart failure, because they're led out of the hospital. Their speciality is led out of the hospital, even though the patient is in community. But that patient, again, might have multimorbidities, and how do you go about really managing that? So I think it does also need a real change in the way that we set up our services to be more patient-centred and focus around the patient rather than around the speciality or condition. Then the last one I mentioned out of sort of those use cases in communication, and really helping to maintain a closer communication with doctors. And I don't know, this might be controversial, actually support a tighter bond between the clinicians and their patients. I think there's one school of thought that says technology is getting in the way. I'm not going in to see my GP. I can't get to see my GP. I've got to triage myself through the app first. It's a barrier between the patient and the clinician. I think there's another way to look at it, as in the doctor, the clinician, the nurse, they can spend more time talking to the patient because they don't have to do the measurements. They've got the measurements, they're coming through, they've got the data, they can, and they have a more seamless communication flow. It's not episodic. Using that data as a way of communicating between the two and being able to understand people better through the use of that data. But most importantly, it's really about making those timely interventions that can improve, the care and the outcomes, but the experience of the patient in moving through the system and moving through the pathway. So really important. I just realised, can everyone hear me? I've wandered away from the mic, as I've got a tendency to do. Perhaps I'll step back and make sure you can hear me. What was I saying? Yeah, so yes. So in addition to that communication, it can also support you, be that kind of coach in terms of what you're trying to achieve with your health. Providing you with prompts around, be it taking medication, be it eating correctly, etc. So it's about having those ongoing communications between the visits. Not necessarily replacing the visits. If a visit is necessary, of course you must have the visit. But having that continual dialogue through data between patient and clinician. So I think we are seeing, it's that blurring of lines between, what is health, what is delivered by the NHS, what is care delivered by social care, and what is the individual's responsibility in terms of their fitness and their wellness. And from that, we're also seeing, I think, a change in the sort of companies that are engaging in this space. So I've been in the sort of medical device area for decades, quite frankly, a long time. And the companies involved there were mainly those down the right-hand side. And apologies for anyone in the room that if you're not on that list, I just picked the top 10 by revenue. Traditional medical device diagnostic companies. But increasingly, we're seeing on the right-hand side, let's call it tech startup type companies, quite possibly being spun out of the NHS or out of academia, maybe out of a tech background as well. But a company sort of focused and built up from technology. Now, top and bottom, we got some big players. We got the big tech companies who all have significant plays in the health environment in different ways, but all significantly trying to get involved in health. And at the bottom, you've got kind of some of those infrastructure companies, the electronic health records. And there's a lot of, interplay needed between all these companies. You've got the cloud services being provided by Microsoft or Amazon. You've got the electronic health records that anyone on the left or right-hand side of that picture needs to feed into so you can get the holistic view of what's going on. So really, we need to ensure that all these companies are working together, and a lot of that is around regulation, a lot of that is around international standards to ensure that we do have interoperability, we do have flows of data, we all understand the right data governance procedures, etc. So some of those sort of use cases, that might just be interesting to look here. Where's the money going? So, absolutely, telemedicine is really getting a lot of funding. Now, obviously, there's a pandemic effect to be had in this, where we saw the explosion of telemonitoring. But wellness, mobile apps, data analytics, and clinical decision support, I think it's all some of the areas we've mentioned. There's a lot of funding going into these technological areas. And why is it going in there? Because certainly the UK, but every other system as well, realizes it needs to digitize. Now, this is the latest published official plan. Obviously, as it says on there, this was under the Johnson government. It's a few years old now. We now not only have a different colour of, a different prime minister, we have a different colour of prime minister as well. We've gone from blue to red. What's going to change? What's going to stay the same? I don't know. But broadly, the overarching thrust behind what the previous Conservative government said and what the Labour government is saying now is we need to digitise, we need to use tech within the NHS. So nothing radical is going to change in that respect. They're not going to reverse those changes. The devil will be in the detail of what they can support, how much can they support it with in terms of money. I think it was in the run-up to the election, I think the Conservatives had promised they were going to upgrade 100 MRIs with AI. And the Conservatives said, well, we're going to double the number of MRIs and they're all going to have AI. Be interesting to see how that works. That's a stack of MRIs, which means that's a stack of money. So we shall see what happens in the forthcoming spending review. Going to be very interesting. So the plan, as outlined then, I think it will, in general, continue along this way. We've got to fund digital tools. We've got to help people manage their long-term conditions in their own homes. So absolutely bang on what we're talking about today. Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm not going to run over too much, right? Or at all, hopefully. Bang on what we're talking today. So that is in the plan as we currently stand. We need to support people living independently for longer and supported by the technologies that they need. The NHS app as the front door. Again, this has been reiterated through the election campaign, so I don't see Labour changing anything there at all. I think what might be more interesting is, can we actually accelerate that? Can we plug more things into the app to make it a true front door? But also, there's some things in here, safe, of course, good value digital health products. So what's a good value digital health product? Again, we start getting into the realms now of, okay, how do we regulate these products? What goes through MHRA, what's regulated as a medical device, therefore what can be assessed by NICE. NICE won't assess anything that hasn't been through MHRA. That's within its remit. It's got to be regulated products. So the tracker, the fitness, Fitbit, whatever it might be, is never going to touch NICE. So how do we know it's good value for money? So there's some gaps here in terms of how we assess the wider ecosystem of health technologies and digital technologies. Don't need to go into that one. So Labour, has a plan for health. It has a plan for the life science sector. Regulation is a big aspect of that. And really, we would like to see some significant changes in the regulatory landscape right now. So I'll take you back a number of years. We left Europe. You might recall. The regulatory system has still not quite caught up with that fact. So we don't really have a modern UK conformity assessment. We are pushing very hard now that we are out of Europe, that the UK is 2 to 3% of the global market. If you put up high regulatory barriers to entering this market, innovation is going to come here last. So really we're pushing that we should accept European regulatory approvals, we should accept American regulatory approvals. They are well-known, well-run regulatory regimes. And there's proposals out at the moment moving in that direction. So regulation is going to be really important to make sure we can have a marketplace here that is receptive to innovation. Procurement and adoption. There is no line of sight between regulation and a person getting a product in front of them. You can go fairly seamlessly from MHRA through to NICE. With a few little wrinkles, you can maybe just get to a commissioning policy of some sort. To then actually get to any transparent form of funding for that technology, you're in the lap of the gods. So there is no transparent route. Other jurisdictions are doing it better than the UK. So this is something, again, we would hope that the Labour government can address. In broad terms, there are proposals out from the Department of Health that came out prior to the Labour win, which still don't address all of the issues within that pathway. So we will be pushing for change in that point. Partnership for industry. Sorry, I'll perhaps start cutting a few bits out before I run out of time. Partnership with industry. Streeting came in and said straight off, this Department of Health and Social Care is now about economic growth. They've got to work with industry. Why are they about economic growth? Not because they particularly want to see companies grow, but they want to see more tax revenues coming in without having to tax all of us individually. They need the growth in the country to be able to afford the NHS. They need to be able to afford the NHS because it's the number one thing that people vote on. So if they don't get the NHS right, they don't get back in. So if they don't get the money to fund it, out of the job again. Because they're saying there's not a huge amount of money right now. I think that was Rachel Reeves. I should have attributed it, sorry. Not a lot of money right now, and they need to put a lot of money into addressing the acute issues. The elective backlog has been a key target. You need to address that. But that in itself ties back to what we're talking about today about chronic illness, because 70% of beds are taken up by someone with a chronic illness. Not saying they don't need to be there because they've had an exacerbation or something, but if we could have done something earlier, they might not be there. Therefore, you can get more beds, more people through the elective backlog, etc. So, really need to address these issues. So, in summary, we've got a big issue. It's a growing issue. Goes across physical and mental health. There's a lot of technology out there that can really support long-term conditions. But we need to make sure we are using the right technology. The NHS needs to ensure it's getting value for money, so we need a better pathway to do all this. There's a whole range of companies involved, some with experience from medical devices, some technology companies. We need to bring all that together. But there's a whole range of use cases, both regulated or non-regulated, where it can really have an impact. But it's complex because it cuts across operational boundaries, it cuts across budgeting boundaries. So that makes it really difficult to actually have a conversation with someone who can make a change on the ground. But politically and operating in the NHS, there is support for this. So thank you very much for your time. Really feel that HealthTech, has a real role to play in managing long-term conditions. I know, our 400 members, but everyone else in the sector really keen to work in partnership with the NHS at ICB level, at trusts, at a local district nurse base, whatever it might be. So thank you very much for your time. Am I handing over to you two ladies?